Let's revise some epistemology for AQA Philosophy A level and talk about exam technique too. Remember, here's how to achieve your target grade in philosophy. You need to memorize thoroughly the details of the topics mentioned in the specification. You need to be able to talk about what they ask you about, just like most exams. However, you also need to be able to write a really good 25-mark evaluative essay, maybe using SEGAL, my acronym, on the spot, using your knowledge of criticisms of different philosophical arguments. So you've got AO1, effectively knowing stuff, and AO2, being able to analyze stuff as well. How are you going to make sure you're able to do that? How are you going to revise? Just in case you don't know it already, do something. Don't just read. Condense your notes. Make new notes. Colour them. Draw pictures if it helps you. Plug gaps in your knowledge using textbooks. Make flashcards. Whatever the latest revision trend is. Actually do something. I know reading is doing something, but if you do something more active than just reading, it'll go into your brain better. Go over feedback you've had on homework essays. Close any gaps there. Respond to feedback. Have a dialogue with your teacher, make them feel good about themselves. Have a 25-mark essay plan in your revision ready for the topics that could come up. More on that coming later. There'll be lots of ideas of questions in this PowerPoint/video. Don't email me because you don't know my email address and I won't respond. This is a YouTube video version of something I've used in classroom. But yeah, bottom line, effort times time equals grade. Put in the work and you will get the grade you want if you put in enough time and effort. More advice how to revise that I suggest. You can read that through for yourself. I'm not going to witter on about it. Okay, things to use with this PowerPoint. Obviously, it's not enough by itself. Sorry, this video. You need your class notes as well. You need to look at homework essays and close the gaps on them. You need the Cardinal textbook, which hopefully you have access to, own or at least have access to. The Lacewing textbook is also very useful. Remember, the whole of that is online, and there are loads of other resources online, including right now this video. Right, here is for 2019 the master list of epistemology past paper questions. Unfortunately, it doesn't really give us much help. It gives a little bit of help, we'll see, because this is the first time that the epistemology specification has been asked about using the A2 format. So really we only have the A2. Make sure that you can define all of these terms. You might want to pause this video now and just check that you can define all of these. But very quickly, remember, an assertion or a claim is a statement about the world, something you're claiming about the world. Also the same as a proposition, a statement about a state of affairs, how things are. An antecedent is a hypothetical proposition in the form if this then that, if x then y. Part of the hypothetical proposition is the antecedent. The then bit is the consequent. Alright, so if the antecedent then the consequent. Analytic, remember, if a statement is analytically true, it is true by definition, by true by virtue of the meanings of the words in the statement. Synthetic statements that are true aren't true like that though. They depend on something else. You have to synthesize them with something else. They depend on something else for their truth. A priori, from before experience. Knowledge, arguments can be a priori. They don't deal in sense experience. A posteriori, from after experience, to do with experienced things, arguments or knowledge. Necessary truths must be the case. One way of saying it is perhaps in all possible worlds, but not necessarily, I suppose. But yeah, in this world at least, a necessary truth is always logically the case, must be the case. If it's contingent, it's not necessary. It depends on something else for being true. Hopefully this is just drilling because your philosophy teacher has drilled them into you millions of times. Anyway, if something is consistent, it fits with another claim. If the two claims are consistent, if they're compatible with one another, logically inconsistent, they're not. Objective and subjective, be careful with those. Those are slippery words. They can be used vaguely and carelessly in essays, but very loosely, objectivity has to do with what is the case, independent and external of our judgments and perceptions, doesn't it? What's objectively out there Subjectivity has to do with what is individual and personal to subjects, doesn't it? So if it's subjective, it's to do with a particular subject's view on the matter. So you might subjectively subscribe to an objective truth, but because the interrelationship between those two is so complicated, just be very careful about being precise with those two terms. True, false, I'm not going to patronize you with what those mean. A tautology, just in case you forgot, is effectively saying the same thing twice. It's something that is makes logical sense. A statement is a tautology if, what's my written down definition? Yeah, it's true by definition. A dilemma is a problem where you have two different options, like the Euthyphro dilemma later on in Metaphysics of God. A paradox is a contradictory or apparently contradictory statement, e.g. this sentence is false. That's a logical paradox. It seems to give you two options which contradict each other. It's a logical inconsistency in itself. A proof is technically it's a deductive argument that works because all the premises are true and the logic is valid, so it is therefore sound. It can be used to refer to any argument that establishes the truth of its conclusion, but strictly you have deductive proofs. That could be useful for interrogating essay questions if it asks you, is this possible to prove, or are you convinced by this argument? Make sure you know whether you're talking about induction or deduction. And justification is reasons that you give for a particular belief or claim, isn't it? Good. Right, here we go, content. Here's what you need to know about for philosophy A-level epistemology. Let's rattle through this. Obviously this isn't enough by itself, this video, but I hope just to jog your memory and remind you of the key points that you have gone into more depth with in your own revision, I hope. So 3 kinds of knowledge right at the start of the course. Remember, 3 kinds of knowledge are acquaintance knowledge, knowledge of someone, e.g. I know the pupils that I've taught. Skill knowledge, knowledge how, I know how to record a video using PowerPoint, however boring and without bells and whistles that may be, I at least know how to do it. And propositional knowledge, knowledge of claims, knowledge of facts and about the world. Don't forget those. They can sneak those on you because they're done very quickly at the start of the course usually. What does a philosophical definition need? If you remember back to your Zagzebski text, it needs to talk about all the necessary conditions for something to be the case, for that thing to be that thing, and which together are sufficient. So remember, a necessary condition is an antecedent that you need for that consequent, and a sufficient condition is one which by itself can result in the consequent. So all the necessary conditions together are sufficient for the consequent. Right, so how, based on those ideas, is propositional knowledge defined, excuse me. So that's what you study, isn't it, as the first part of the epistemology course. K here means propositional knowledge. Be clear, that's what you're asked to discuss and define in A-level philosophy. Remember the standard definition of knowledge that was in use, well, at least since Plato, you can take it out of Plato from the Timaeus and other texts, is JTB equals knowledge. Knowledge is justified, true belief. You have a reason to think that is the case and that you actually think, you actually believe. And that was the definition of knowledge in philosophy. You could say in Western philosophy for many, many years until Gettier came along with his little paper and blew it out of the water with Gettier cases. I'm not going to repeat the Smith and Jones case. Hopefully you've done it so many times you could recite it with your eyes closed, hung upside down, revolving slowly over a fire in order to avoid being cooked by some cannibals. But there's that Smith and Jones 10 coins in the pocket, isn't there? There's also the Ford. Does Jones own a Ford one, or Brown, whoever it is? They could technically ask you about that because it is technically on the spec, but I've never seen them do it, so that would be really mean. But yeah, if you've got the owning a Ford Gettier case from the original article up your sleeve, and you're asked for either of them, I would maybe produce that. That might impress the examiners and wake them up a bit from wading through pockets of coins all over the place. So in response to Gettier cases which show that you can have JTB without it necessarily being knowledge, or without those being sufficient for knowledge for most people, because it seems to be just true by luck, people had to try and come up with alternatives to JTB, didn't they? So one alternative is infallibilism, represented here by my unorthodox equation. People don't really write it like this, but this is just my shorthand way of writing. Infallible justified true belief is knowledge, according to the infallibilists, such as Descartes. You could call him an infallibilist. This is saying that you only have knowledge if the justification is completely watertight and infallible, and you can't question it, you can't doubt it. That has huge problems, doesn't it? Because you don't have a very long list of knowledge if you're an infallibilist, arguably, unless you're Descartes, in which case you think you can prove all sorts of things. But that's contentious, and more on that later. So an alternative, if you don't like infallibilism, the no false lemmas, adding a no false lemmas criterion. So remember, for this way of thinking, knowledge is justified true belief that involves no false lemmas. A lemma being not a small furry animal that jumps off cliffs, but a intermediary proposition in an argument. So basically just a premise in an argument, which might be explicit or might be implicit. It could be a hidden false lemma. You could call it no hidden false assumptions if you wanted to clarify further. But that might be a way of dealing with Gettier cases. If you can apply all of these, by the way, to the original Gettier cases, then you'd be in a very good position to write about different solutions in an essay. Don't forget, fake barn cases throw another spanner in the works. They're a particular variety of Gettier cases where the belief appears to be luckily true because of the context. So for example, if you're driving through Barn County and you see lots of fake barns and think they're barns, and you're wrong because it's not true, but then you happen to see a real barn and you think it's a real barn and you're right, some people are uncomfortable calling that knowledge because it just seems lucky. That's known as a fake barn case. There is JTB and arguably N as well, but that's arguable. But often people are uncomfortable calling that knowledge. So you have a fake barn case, a particular subset of Gettier cases. Another alternative solution, RTB equals K, reliabilism. So it's not a justified true belief, it's a reliably formed true belief. And then finally, virtue epistemology puts forward a virtuously formed true belief, or a true belief that was arrived at by intellectual virtue. This is people like Zagzebski and Sousa and others. The idea here is an odd one, but you've studied it. Remember, it's turning knowledge into a justification, or the validity of knowledge into a sort of moral quality. So as long as you've arrived at it by virtuous process, out of character traits of yours which have to do with you being intelligent and using your intellect correctly, moral hyphen epistemological virtues, then you can say it's knowledge if it's also true and believed. Similar to reliabilism, isn't it? But it's maybe phrasing it in a different way, looking at it from a different angle. Whether any of these solve the Gettier cases is up to you, and offer better definitions of knowledge. That's up to you. Make sure you could analyze which definition you like best, although that was actually the AS question. Okay, next up, theories of perception. Remember, you need to know about these three different theories of perception and what they hold about the immediate objects of perception and the external world. This is very definitional, but also be able to analyze them as well. Direct realism, remember, holds that the immediate objects of perception are the objects in the external world which we perceive directly. So we perceive the world directly as it is. In other words, mind-independent objects are what we perceive directly. Indirect realism holds that the immediate objects of perception are sense data, Russell's term, or our own sense experience, in other words, which represents or corresponds in some way to the external world, which is there. It does correspond to mind-independent objects, but the sense data themselves, the experiences, are mind-dependent. Alright? This is revision, I really hope you know that. Idealism, you could actually call, I hope this doesn't confuse you too much, but you could call idealism direct idealism, because it holds that the direct immediate objects of experience are experiences, or Berkeley's term, ideas, hence idealism. But the big difference is that it's anti-realist about the external world, isn't it? Because it holds there are no mind-independent objects all that exists only in minds. So that's the three. Direct realism, there's an external world out there, we perceive it directly. Indirect realism, it's out there but we perceive it indirectly. Idealism, it isn't out there at all. All that exists only exists in minds, held together by the mind of God. Let's go into direct realism a bit more. So remember, you need to be able to criticize all of these theories with the criticisms on the specification, and maybe others which you've thought or read or learned or discussed about. The argument from illusion, for example. So sometimes apparently there appear to be illusions, like sticking a pen in water and it goes bent, but we wouldn't say it actually is bent, so this seems to say that direct realism must be wrong. There must be a disjunction between the external world and the world as we perceive it. The argument from hallucination, that similarly sometimes we see things like right now I'm seeing a big sofa and my television and actually a fireplace and a nice book as well suspended in front of me because it's very late and I'm at work doing this ridiculous video, but it's not actually there. Such a hallucination would seem to suggest that my experience doesn't always directly correspond with the external world. Time lag. Scientists have informed us that there is a bit of a time lag because of the speed of light between when events happen and when we register them in our brains. Either a very, very, very short one in terms of events happening close to us, or maybe a slightly longer one. I think it's 8 minutes, I always forget the figure, that it takes light to reach us from the sun. So this time lag suggests we aren't perceiving the world as it is happening now, but as it was happening in the recent past, so it can't be a direct correspondence. And perceptual variation. This is Russell talking about how when you walk around a table it changes as you look at it from different angles, and also different people will see the table in different ways depending on where they are. This suggests that our perceptions don't directly correspond with what's out there in the external world. Of course, the direct realists have responses to all of those, and you have considered those, and you would be able, in an essay, if you've got a 25 marker on it, to analyse and consider whether you think those responses are successful. Perhaps they have to do with how we define, we precisely define what the words direct and indirect mean. Perhaps they have to do with how the direct or indirect realist understands the frequency with which our experiences correspond with the external world, or the degree to which the degree of overlap between our experience and the external world, because it might not be all the time for the direct realist. They might be just saying that most of the time they do, or they might have other complicated ways of talking about how we're still perceiving things directly when, for example, we see an oar bent in or a pen bent in water, such as talking about relational properties and things like that. I refer you to Dr. Michael Layton's textbook, in particular, if you want further discussion about that. Let's keep going. Indirect realism. Oh, one of my bullet points has suspended in the middle of nowhere for some reason. I'm just going to put them all up actually. So, indirect realism as well. You need to be able to talk about criticisms of that as well, in a pirate voice or not. One problem is that it could lead to skepticism about the existence of mind-independent objects, isn't it? That is potentially a very big problem, because as soon as you say that there is a disjunction between what's out there in the world and what we're experiencing, you now raise the question of, well, how do we know there's anything out there at all? Because maybe if some things are a dream, some things are illusions, some things are hallucinations, how do we know that all of our experiences aren't those things? Because there's no way of subjectively, there's that word, distinguishing between the quality of those different experiences. Maybe there is, but that's the objection anyway. How could you respond to that? This time responses are actually on the specification, so you really must know about these. Locke responds, doesn't he, by talking about how we don't choose what we experience. Experience is given to us, it's impressed upon us. I mean, you can think about different things, you can choose to imagine different things, but that certainly doesn't have the same vivaciousness and quality as regular sense experience, which just happens to us, doesn't it? You can't choose, I can't choose to see a particular thing when I look out of the window right now. It's just there, it's happening to me, it's given. This suggests that it's being impressed upon our mind for Locke from an external source, and is not just in our minds. Think of that what you will. Locke and Catherine Trotter Cockburn (brackets attributed) also talk about how the coherence of our different kinds of experience suggests that it is coming from an external source, from an external world as well, don't they? So, for example, the different senses confirm one another. Something can look jagged and sharp to me with my sense of sight, and then I will go up and touch it and it will feel sharp and pointy and jagged with my sense of feeling. And also, sense experience is just regular. It's not all over the place. It doesn't happen in random packets of meaninglessly and chaotically juxtaposed data. There's an order and a regularity to it. It coheres with itself. This suggests that it's coming from a coherent, ordered, regular external source for Locke and Trotter Cockburn. And then you've got Russell, haven't you, again in the Problems of Philosophy, saying that, okay, fair enough, it could be coming from an external world, or it could just be in our minds. However, if you line up those hypotheses against each other, the hypothesis that it comes from an external world is the stronger of the two by inductive argument, because it's more likely that these experiences actually come from an outside source. Doesn't go into a huge amount of detail on that, I feel, but that's his basic point, is that he thinks by induction it's more likely to be the case that there is an external source to our experience. Berkeley, however, would challenge all of that, wouldn't he? And indeed challenges indirect realism in general, moving back to criticism of that, by saying, well, this is a strange one, isn't it? One of Berkeley's points, more coming in a moment, is that how can we know the nature of mind-independent objects? Because mind-independent ideas, his term for experiences, cannot be like mind-independent objects. In other words, an experience by definition must be different from a thing in itself. Sorry, I slipped into a bit of cant there. From an object in the external world. All we have to go on about these supposed objects in the external world are our experiences of them, but he's basically saying it's a category error to try and mix up experiences and this imaginary idea of objects beyond us, because such things must be so unlike one another were the latter to actually exist, that it would be impossible to talk about them corresponding in any way. I don't think I've explained that very well, because yes, you also need to be able to give criticisms and explain criticisms of idealism, don't you? But yeah, first of all, to explain why Berkeley is an idealist at all. So one reason is because of his attack on the primary-secondary property distinction, isn't it? That distinction comes from Locke, remember, or it was very common to Locke's time, and Locke was one of the people who made it. Remember, primary qualities for indirect realists in the objects themselves, like size and shape. Secondary qualities or properties are peculiar to our sense data and our experiences, so they're just part of our experiences, like taste and colour and so on. And Berkeley thinks you can't make a distinction for all sorts of reasons, because he thinks you can't imagine an object that doesn't have any secondary qualities. If effectively you want to say all we know is secondary qualities through our sense experience. Another reason is because he thinks that the primary qualities vary just as much as the secondary qualities do. For example, a rock will look enormous to an ant or absolutely tiny to a giant. So size is not fixed and objective in that sense. It's another thing that varies, and therefore it's mind dependent as well. It's not a primary quality. It's just, everything is a secondary quality, or better to just say everything is part of mind dependent ideas. Really though, his master argument, not called that by him, that doesn't matter too much, does it though? But his master argument, as it's known, is that it's impossible to conceive of something. This relates to the last point on the previous slide. It's impossible to conceive of something without thinking of it in your mind. Therefore, everything that exists must exist in minds. So his example that he uses to make the argument is a tree, isn't it? It's impossible to think of an unconceived tree, to imagine a tree that exists outside of a mind, because as soon as you imagine the tree, there you go, it's already existing in your mind. Therefore, everything must exist in minds. Of course, there's objections you can make to Berkeley, he objected that he himself is making a category error there by mixing up things as they are thought of and things as they are independent of our minds, and saying that just and you can attack his logic in doing that, but that's the argument. Then you've got criticisms of idealism, haven't you? So these are now not arguments for idealism, but criticism of idealism. Illusion and hallucinations can also cause problems for idealists, can't they? Because if everything is mind dependent, why do we call some things illusions and some things hallucinations and some things real, inverted commas, experiences? Because actually they're all still just mind dependent experiences. There's no external world for them to correspond to or not. So this seems to be counterintuitive for idealism. It seems to cause problems for idealism. And Berkeley will reply with comments about, you can tell those kinds of experiences are different because of their strength and their vivacity and so on. But that's a potential problem for idealism. Then you've got the old chestnut that being an idealist can lead to solipsism, because if everything is in minds, where is our real evidence of minds that are external to our own? If you've severed yourself, if you've destroyed the external world, okay, fair enough. But now all we're left with is our own mind-dependent ideas. Where do we ever perceive other people's or other minds' mind-dependent ideas? We seem to be left stranded in a solipsistic cave, just by ourselves, enjoying our own mind-dependent ideas and not knowing if anyone else's are there or real, or indeed if there isn't anyone else at all. Bit miserable, but idealism could lead to that, to solipsism. Of course, Berkeley wants to hold his system together with God, doesn't he? And he has his own arguments for why God exists, in terms of where these ideas in our minds must have come from. But that's hugely problematic, because if you don't agree with that proof of God, much as with Descartes' system, the whole thing crumbles down and collapses back into solipsism. Also, there are some quite niche problems with God in idealism. For example, as mentioned on the specification, God is supposed to have all of the ideas that we experience, the experiences that we experience, in his mind, because ours are copies of his. Very Platonic, that, isn't it? However, if God is meant to be perfect and so on, I'll just stick with perfect for now, then how can he have ideas or experiences in his mind such as pain? Because he's meant to be perfect, so how could he ever suffer? Also, how can he have sensations at all? Because he's an unchanging, perfect being. How can he have, finite, fallible, icky, don't use that word, but material sensations like we do? Obviously, idealists actually wouldn't use material in that sense. But never mind. How can God have sensations like we do when he's meant to be a perfect, supreme mind? That seems to not make sense. And Berkeley has complicated ways of replying to that. I told you about how our experiences are copies of the sort of purer, more abstract ideas in God's mind. But there might be problems there as well, mightn't there? Moving on now from theories of perception, the next big heading, which I haven't put on, but never mind, is, what is it? Reason as a source of knowledge, isn't it? And the first subtopic for that is innatism. Innatism, as you will remember, is the view that there is some knowledge which is inborn, as it were, innate, and this knowledge is part of our minds prior to any experiences that we have, although experience might activate it or unlock it, as it were. So Plato argues for that, doesn't he, with his slave boy argument. Really, the slave boy is just an illustration, I think, but you'll remember that in the Meno, Socrates manages to coax out of a slave boy, Plato argues, or hopes to show, some geometric truths about squares just by asking the boy questions, and the boy had no prior knowledge of mathematics. This seems to suggest that he had some innate knowledge of geometric truths. It didn't come to him through experience. Hugely problematic for 21st century empiricists, isn't it? But that's the argument in a nutshell. You know it in a bit more detail than that. And then Leibniz's argument that effectively that you don't need to check necessary truths again and again each time. You don't need to work out again each time through your experience that triangles have three sides. Once you've seen that, you just know it. You just attend to that fact in your mind, and it becomes independent of the experience of triangles, or perhaps better, that the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. That is something that once grasped, fair enough, it might be activated by experience, but once grasped, you do not need experience to check it. In that sense, it is a priori, so Leibniz argues, that must have come from an inborn, innate capacity of the mind to grasp that necessary truth. Those are some classic arguments for innatism, but there are big problems, aren't there? So Locke would argue back against innatism in his own way, referring to his view of the mind as tabula rasa, where everything comes from experience. It starts blank and experiences get built up. And what's his major criticism of innatism? This escapes me right now. You can add that in the comments, or I'll mention it if I come back to it. I'm doing this without looking at notes because I'm trying to treat it as if I was just standing with you outside the exam room, just talking to you about things you need to know and revising with you. So argue back with me, or sorry, write back to me, put in the comments, how does Locke argue against innatism in a nutshell? Oh yeah, there's the good old tabula rasa, which I've just talked about. Yeah, be aware that they're allowed to ask you an innatism 25 marker. It could come up. So make sure you've got something up your sleeve along the lines of, are there innate ideas? Which side of this debate would you be on? Okay, actually I've just remembered some of Locke's arguments against innatism. This has to do with Locke's favourite people, doesn't it? Children and idiots. Children and idiots, for example, says Locke, cannot see that, say, the angles of a triangle always add up to 180. So innate ideas cannot be universal, because there are some people, children and idiots, and maybe PE teachers. Sorry, no, I love PE teachers who don't have these ideas, therefore they can't be universal and inborn. It's along those lines, and others, I think it should be Locke's arguments against innatism, really, that innatism is criticised. I hope you can't hear people in the adjacent classroom being shouted at and told off as I'm in this video. Okay, next up we have the intuition and deduction thesis. This is Descartes, isn't it? Can you briefly explain what all these bullet points refer to? Well, I'm going to have a go. You try first, and then you can hear mine. So, in fact, let's do them one by one. So, intuition and deduction. In this context, an intuition is a truth which can be grasped simply by attending to it. So, something which you can know is true just by thinking about it. You intuit it. That's an intuition. A true intuition, at least. And a deduction, as you know, is a process of reasoning. So Descartes' intuition and deduction thesis starts with an intuition, doesn't it, and then tries to deduce from that intuition further truths. His thesis is his argument that you can get from point A to point Z, or whatever, simply through intuition and deduction. You can work out all these different philosophical truths. And he uses clear and distinct ideas to do that, doesn't he? That's a famous phrase of his in the Meditations, where he puts forward a version of his intuition and deduction thesis. Clear and distinct ideas are ideas which are very forceful in our minds. They're clear. We see them with they shine brightly, to speak metaphorically, in our minds. In other words, they make a powerful impact on us and intuitively appear true. And distinct means they're different from other ideas. One reason being because they are so clear, but we perceive them to be make a powerful impact on our minds and seem to be true, like clearly true. It's like a blinding flash of the obvious, a clear and distinct idea. So here's a clear and distinct idea, which also happens to be an a priori intuition, the cogito. I think, therefore I am. Or if you want to be even better, even more precise, in the Meditations it's just I am, I exist, but it's fine to use cogito from Discourse on the Method. I think, therefore I am. That's something which Descartes thinks can be intuited, so seen to be true just by thinking about it, because you can't doubt that you are a thinking being. As soon as you're thinking about even that, as soon as you're doubting, you're still thinking. Hopefully you covered this at the start of your philosophy course. And it's also a priori because that's independent of experience. Again, you don't need to experience that again and again through sense to know that it's true. As soon as you are thinking, you know that you are a thinking being, even if you're doubting. So it's an a priori intuition, and incidentally a clear and distinct idea to say, I think, therefore I am, or I am and I exist. So that's the foundational intuition, isn't it, of his intuition and deduction thesis. From there, from this a priori intuition of the cogito, he then builds, he deduces further, doesn't he, by way of his arguments for the existence of God and his proof of the external world. And that's the order, isn't it? So he builds up from I think, therefore I am, to looking around in his mind, oh, I also have this clear and distinct idea of God. He then uses that very idea to prove that God must exist, using chains of reasoning which you have learnt about in your lessons and have revised. I'm just reminding you, I'm prompting things right now in this general summary. And once he's established that God exists, then he can use that to establish, well, first technically the possibility that there's an external world that he is truly perceiving, and then the actuality, the reality that there is an external world which he perceives clearly. That's the last piece in the thesis, in the building, and that, remember, that's the order that it goes. Not everyone likes this though, do they? Some people even fall at the first hurdle and don't agree with the cogito and would say that I think therefore I am is actually incoherent and not valid as an a priori intuition which is self-evidently true for all sorts of reasons. I mean, Nietzsche would say this, Buddhists would say this, Hume perhaps would say this, because they would argue that there is no such thing as an I. Where is this I which you are claiming or assuming in such a statement? Actually, all there is ideas and experiences, or ideas / experiences. Where is this so-called personality holding them all together? What does that I refer to? So some people would say that even that foundational principle is problematic and spurious. Also, if you don't like the arguments for the existence of God, much like we said with idealism, then the middle tier of the building is going to fall apart, and the thesis, the system, the building is going to collapse. You're not going to be able to prove the external world exists on Descartes' term, and you might just, even if you did agree with those, you might just disagree with how he works his way up from the existence of God to the reality of the external world. Although personally I think that's less contentious. It really hinges, in my opinion, on whether the arguments for God's existence that Descartes uses are successful or not. How might Hume's fork be applied to these arguments? They slip that in, the cheeky AQA examiners on the specification, don't they? Remember, Hume's fork, which comes up all over the place, is that knowledge must be either A, necessary, what's his term? Either a relation of ideas, so that's necessary truths like triangles have three sides, or B, a matter of fact, which confusingly for Hume means true by experience and verifiable in sense experience. Is very similar, isn't it, to Ayer's verification principle, which he got from the logical positivists, which they in turn, I think, got from Hume. So that's Hume's fork, aka Ayer's verification principle. Extremely useful, comes up all over the philosophy paper. So there you go, that's a freebie, that's useful for all of your philosophy A level. How does it apply here? Well, you could argue, and I believe Hume would argue, that Descartes' deductions here, and even the initial intuition, first of all, aren't self-evidently necessarily true, so not a relation of ideas, and second of all, cannot be checked in experience, because certainly you can't check that there is such a thing as an I, or that God exists, or that the external world is real, although perhaps more on that later, just through experience. So it's not a matter of fact either. So if the logic doesn't work here, and you can't do self-evident necessary relations of ideas, and there's nothing to actually check in hard experience, then you can't pick up any of these pieces of knowledge, so-called knowledge, on the fork, so to speak. Therefore they are not knowledge, and the whole system is invalid. The thesis fails. That's the manner in which Hume might criticize Descartes' project. And of course there are issues though with those responses, aren't there? All of it's philosophy, isn't it? There are issues with everything. You can analyze all of this, but just the fact that this is on the specification also means you could get an essay. It's rare, but it does happen, just on Descartes' intuition and deduction thesis. Does Descartes succeed in his intuition and deduction thesis? So make sure you know, and you could say what you think about this thesis the foundation and then how he builds on it, and that you could write an essay either saying why it works or why it doesn't work. And I've given you some ideas. Hopefully you have your own too. Okay, one more slide. Here we go. We're almost there. Coming up to the 30-minute mark. We're going to be alright. So finally, you need to know about what AQA A-level philosophy has to say about the limits of knowledge. Could you briefly explain what all of these bullet points refer to? You need to be able to talk about skepticism, don't you? And the distinction between philosophical skepticism and normal incredulity. In other words, philosophical skepticism is not just not believing in anything or doubting everything. It's not as simplistic as that, and also it's different to the normal way in which you would be unbelieving or disbelieving about particular claims. What it is, it's adopting a skeptical attitude to all beliefs, so it is universal in that sense in the case of global skepticism, so as to arrive at more clarity about the truth of your particular beliefs and how you justify them. So it's a tool. Philosophical skepticism is a tool of doubting all one's beliefs in order to ascertain better which beliefs are true and justified. That's the best way I can say it. I hope they would give that marks. That's my best way of saying it. But you can distinguish, can't you, between global and local skepticism. Global skepticism is doubting everything, and local skepticism is doubting particular claims, like being skeptical about Descartes' arguments for the existence of God or whatever it is. So what skepticism does within epistemology is to hone one's beliefs in the sense of clarifying what beliefs are we have good reasons for holding and bad reasons for holding. It's like a test. Does it pass the skeptical test, or could it be doubted? This is just what Descartes did at the start of Meditations, isn't it? He tried out a bit of global skepticism. What can I doubt? And he used that to cut back all his extraneous beliefs, which were on shaky foundations, to get to the firm foundation at the bottom, metaphorically speaking, and then work his way up from there to make sure he was only holding beliefs which he thought he could justify infallibly and certainly. Someone might do it today and just justify things inductively with a degree of certainty or with good reasons, but that's how Descartes did it. So the way Descartes did that, happens in what's come to be called three waves. So when you see three waves, or if you ask for a wave, excuse me, losing my voice, in order, think senses, dreams, demon. That's the way I would think of it. So wave one is I can doubt my senses because sometimes they deceive me. Some things look far away sometimes when they're actually up close, and perhaps vice versa. So that leads me to doubt my senses. But then wave two, some things, it goes even deeper than that, because dreams have shown me that sometimes my whole sense experience can be doubted, because I thought I was experiencing something real, but it turned out I was dreaming. Everything could be a dream. This is just the argument from hallucination, isn't it, against direct realism. Therefore, I might be in a dream now or in the Matrix. Oh, am I still recording? Okay, sorry, I just lost recording there for a second. Computer died on me. Where do we get to? Yeah, wave two is that I might be in a dream, so all of my sense experience might be doubted, but that still leaves you with those good old innate necessary truths. However, maybe wave three, there is an evil demon or an evil genius deceiving me, even about things which are always true in dreams. Like even in dreams, for example, triangles have three sides and their angles add up to 180. Last time I checked, although I've never actually checked that in a dream. Maybe the next time you're dreaming, just have a check. Do the angles of triangles in your dream experience add up to 180. But by the time you're doing that, you'll probably realize that you are in fact actually in a dream. So it will be dubitable whether you are in a dream anymore in the proper sense, and you'll probably just wake up because you've had that level of consciousness to realise what's going on. That's all right. Sorry, brief interruption from the humanities office assistant there. Service back on now. Yeah, so maybe even the truths of logic aren't true because of the evil demon, in which case there's nothing that's true and everything could be doubted. All except that I think and therefore I am. That's how Descartes gets down to his a priori intuition using 3 waves of doubts. I should really stop talking soon because we're approaching the 35-minute mark. It's going to be half an hour video. How could you respond to that? Well, different ways. You know Descartes' own response. I was just talking about it. Empiricists could also respond and say, well, effectively, they're saying that the best we have to go on is that there is an external world, isn't there? Because empiricists are very interested in sense experience, and they wouldn't waste their time messing around with these innate a priori ideas. They would just be happy to say, look, this is the best we've got because our world and our very life is made up of sense experience. That's a massive gloss, but you're probably completely exhausted and brain dead by now. And reliabilism, in a perhaps similar way, would be saying that as long as you've got a reliable process that is leading to your beliefs, such as sense experience, then that's good enough. Again, that's good enough. You don't need to doubt those beliefs, e.g. the belief that there is an external world at all. Okay, let's leave it there. Best of luck with the philosophy exam. As long as you've revised or can fit in some intense last minute cramming, you'll be fine. In fact, those students of mine that I have personally taught this year, I know that you've worked hard all year. If you've enjoyed any or this video or any of my videos, or indeed lessons if you know me, this is cheeky and shameless, but that's because I don't need to have shame. Please consider endorsing me on LinkedIn, help me to get future jobs perhaps, and also I write things and I put them on Amazon until I get published by a mainstream publishing house, which I'm still working on, by the way. I write philosophical and theological and fantastical and science fictional things. So go and have a look at those. Some of them are free on Amazon. Just search LIT Terrace on Amazon. Hope this was helpful to you. Thanks for watching.